Good day, everybody, and welcome to episode 13 of the Coldest Murder. Hopefully, everybody's been following along and you viewed the first 12 episodes or you listened to it on the podcast. And this course case involves the tragic murder in 1962 of 9-year-old Caroline Doherty in Bristol Borough, PA. And we've been sorting through all the details and all the suspects and all the ramifications of what's going on right now. It's been a cold case for more than 60 years. And we are delighted to welcome two very important people that are involved in this investigation. Of course, you have seen her before if you watch the podcast. DA, Bucks County DA Jen Schorn is with us. And we're happy to have Detective Tim Perkins with us today, who works with the DA's office, who has been one of the investigators on this case. Welcome, you guys, and we appreciate you coming on today.
Hi,
Thanks.
Mike. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so let's just start with the status of the case. I know, Jen, you've explained this before, but time has gone by now, and when we last left you, you had committed to the DNA testing at a lab in Texas. So, first of all, can you let us know where that stands right now? Because everybody's eager to see whether this DNA will actually solve the case.
That's still a work in progress. There are various layers to that process. The start of that process has unfolded, but the actual analysis, that'll take some time. And then following the analysis would be, if we're fortunate enough to have a workable sample, would be then the genealogy component potentially. There were some steps that we are following at the direction of the lab. There was some requests made before they begin actually testing items that we provide some information from some historical steps that were taken as far as previous forensic tests that were done. So,
Okay, can you flesh that out a little bit for the people who are like myself who really doesn't understand DNA? What does that mean exactly?
so I think I can. It's going to be a little bit, technical, so may not be terribly interesting, but essentially, DNA for admissibility in court for a criminal prosecution is a much higher threshold that you need to meet to be able to say, beyond the certainty that's needed, the scientific certainty, that this is a match, for lack of a better term. The DNA for genealogy is much different. It's a lower threshold, and ultimately, if we were able to identify what we believe to be a match through the type of testing that's done for later, genealogical purposes, we would then later have to do the enhanced test for the one-to-one match, the STR test. So there was work done on these items throughout the years, and I have to praise the Pennsylvania State Police. They have done everything. As there were advancements in technology, I can assure your listeners, they were looking over what evidence they had in their possession and what could be reanalyzed with the new standards. As mentioned before, we went from being able to only use DNA for bodily fluids to now touch DNA. But also the sensitivity of the test, you could use less of a threshold to successfully test for DNA. So they've done all of those things. So the lab we're using now, Othram Labs, wants to look at the work sheets, essentially, from some of the prior tests that were done, because they may have some information that's workable information because their standard is different. And again, this right now is providing closure is the goal. We realize that there's not likely ever going to be a criminal prosecution because we're confident in that the perpetrator of this crime is dead, but we want to provide that closure.
All right, let me just expand on that a little bit, and Detective Perkins, you can obviously add a lot to this. I have spoken to another one of your investigators, Pennsylvania State Police investigators. Those guys were actually supposed to join us on the broadcast today, but they decided not to, and I can understand why. It's an ongoing investigation, and different agencies feel differently about revealing information. But one of the things that he comported to me was that they had found additional clothing or candy wrapper or whatever that was not sent out to be tested in the first place. Is that accurate, Tim?
So, Mike, with the evidence we have in this case, we always have to look at it and see what its probative value will be moving forward. obviously you don't know what belongs to who until you test some things, but there's certainly some things that were collected that probably aren't going to be sent for testing. Some of the items we have, degradation is real, and in a case that's 62 years old, it's certainly real in this case. And some evidence that's been sent out in the past, it's been consumed. The sample is gone. So there are items of evidence, as Jen said, that we are packaging up and getting ready to be sent out, but not every single piece of evidence is being sent out. As Jen said, my counterparts with the state police, we've been working the case hard. I applaud their efforts in this case, and those investigators over the past 6 decades that have done work on this case. It's a challenging case. Obviously, it wasn't challenging; it would have been solved already. So we're working close, and every day we were talking about evidence yesterday, Jen and I, along with the troopers, about additional items that we think should be sent.
So yes, so just to clarify, there is some untested elements that weren't tested the first time that are available to be tested, or that the degradation was so much that that no longer is an option.
I think both of what you said. There are things that were not tested that we're still trying to see if they will survive forensic testing. And two, yeah, we believe there's some items that could survive it, but some are also not there anymore because they've been consumed.
All right, Tim Perkins has been investigating this case, I guess, for the last couple of years. Jen, you relayed to me that this has always been an ongoing investigation. So, Tim, your role in this when you joined on the investigation, can you give me any kind of a guideline on how you proceeded here with this kind of a cold case?
Sure, Mike. When I was asked to be involved with this investigation, a couple years ago, I had looked at the file, not really, digested the whole file. But recently, within the past couple months, myself and the troopers have been working this case essentially every day. So I think the case file is so voluminous for all the work that's been done over the previous 60 years that it's quite frankly, it's hard to get through. Obviously, we have other cases going on too, but it doesn't get any more important than this case right here. And I think with this case, we kind of started with the evidence. We wanted to review the evidence. We actually put eyes on the evidence. We unpackaged some of the stuff and decided what was going to be our most probative piece of evidence or pieces of evidence to send out for testing. Again, they've done the state police have done phenomenal work in the years past, sending stuff out and getting stuff tested, thinking outside the box, sending it to different labs, who was the specialty at any given time. But then you start reading the reports, and then obviously, your uncle started the case in 1962. So we read reports from 1962. Obviously, these are typewritten reports. Even trying to read some of the reports, they don't stand the test of time. Some of those reports are hard to read and hard to get through. But yeah, it's basically just consuming the whole file and trying to get a working knowledge of it and decide what the important parts are.
Hard to get through, meaning they weren't clear. Is that what we're talking about here? They were just conflicting reports, or what?
Maybe I misspoke. No, physically clear. You couldn't read some of them.
The copy.
Okay.
Copies.
Oh, okay. I
No,
got you.
no. Everything is.
Degradation,
Say that again, Vince.
the degradation of paper
Sure.
and
Yes.
ink,
Yes.
Absolutely.
right, falls apart. Now, Tim, you just brought up about Bristol PD and starting this in 1962, and you talked about that from a historical point of view. You were with the Bristol Police, is that right?
I was with Bristol Township Police Department. And
Okay.
this occurred in Bristol Borough. So I have a pretty good idea from the area. And obviously, when I was with Bristol Township and promoted with Bristol Township, we knew about the case and heard about the case. And but obviously, I didn't have the opportunity working for the neighboring town. It wasn't where I worked, so to speak. So I couldn't really dig into the case. So yeah, I worked in Bristol Township, though.
Neighboring.
Yeah, Bristol Township, Vince, and you know that this as well, a little different than Bristol Borough. So Bristol Borough is kind of contained. So Tim, with the hundreds of pages where you have to sort out, and let's just go back to the crime because and the suspects, and the interviews that were taken back then. And I think one of the questions I get is that you had really good suspects. what and explain legally, Jen, if you can add to this, explain legally why there was not enough evidence or probable cause or whatever to hold these suspects. And I think one of the main suspects was allowed to just get out of the area and completely relocate to Louisiana when it looked like if you connected the dots, you can make a case that this guy really, he lied about his alibi, and we're talking about Schrader, and he had a previous criminal record, and he was spotted in the area. All these things. Why was there not enough to hold any of these suspects?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. Mike, what we have, and I've seen this in countless cold cases that we've had the ability to, breathe new life into and successfully prosecute these cases, is, we have the benefit of hindsight. We know, like at the time, I think really what clouded the investigation is there were 4 legitimate targets, suspects. And, it is incredibly rare to have that. So you have a priest with deviant tendencies, you have a guy who confesses, and you have parents who think their son did it, and then you have Schrader. And when I first spoke with you, I mean, to me, Schrader is, and I think it's safe to say, and I can promise you, we are so much further along. You can't even imagine the other steps beyond just the forensic steps that have been taken thus far by this outstanding team of investigators. But Schrader to us, is the most obvious. Only maybe second to Father Sabadish, but that really clouds the investigation because there were so many viable suspects, and so really that by it's in and of itself almost creates the doubt that a prosecutor needs to combat. I can tell you this, that having now had the opportunity since we've last spoke to go through the grand jury investigation that was done in 93, I am blown away at the caliber of the work that was done and the questioning specifically of Schrader by a very skilled prosecutor. It made me proud to know that this person worked in this office before me, and I actually know him professionally, and he's a remarkable work that was done. It just wasn't there. But I can tell you this, we are further along. They have done great work, and I know I can't share much, but really remarkable work.
So it wasn't enough that he had all this circumstantial evidence against him to actually hold him, maybe arrest him, and maybe that was mitigated by the fact that he passed a lie detector test. And we're talking about Schrader now.
Right. He did not pass a lie detector test.
Oh, he did not.
Did
Okay.
not. And in fact, what's frustrating to us is that's inadmissible in court, but it's a very significant tell for us that, you're on the right track. Not only that, but he asserted his Fifth Amendment privilege. He answered a lot of the questions, which was, a successful questioning in grand jury, but he was not, he was, very clearly advised when to assert his Fifth Amendment privilege.
What would they have needed back then to hold him?
More than what they have now. And it's difficult. I mean, I will say their efforts were valiant. They did the job. It's really hard to say, but they would have needed a break. And I often say this in these unsolved cases, that time can be our enemy because you have the degradation of evidence. You have, fading recollections or people that pass, but time can be our friend too, because people who feared an individual when they were, in their orbit, when they were, among them, maybe don't fear them anymore. And certainly once they pass. So I can assure you a great deal of additional information was unearthed, for lack of better
Yeah.
term.
No, I'm not talking about in 1962 when this happened. There just wasn't enough probable cause to arrest this guy.
There was not. There was
Okay.
not. I think that now knowing how much they put into, the targets, all of them, but then, really focusing in on who I think they believe to be their main target, they did their job.
And it
Well,
shows their diligence too, where they had a guy in custody and they realized it wasn't their guy.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Just to continue on this vein, there were two things that I've been told about this case, and one is that uh, now I lost my train of thought here, but yeah, I completely lost my train of thought. So let me just move on. When you interface between the district attorney's investigators and the state police investigators, who's in charge? You always say, well, who makes the final decision? Like what general manager makes the final call on a trade or whatever? How does it work in that particular situation?
You know what? It's a great question, Mike, and I can honestly say we've never had to cross that bridge because we have worked in collaboration with the county detectives go out for every homicide in this county. That is our procedure. But they work in conjunction with and complement the team of municipal police detectives, or in this case, the state police. And a call is made. I mean, yes, ultimately the district attorney is carries the rank of the chief law enforcement officer, but I have amazing detectives I have the privilege of working with and trust their instincts, and they work in collaboration with one another. And I can't speak to the past, but I can say present day, we haven't had to cross that bridge. I think it's safe to say that.
Agreed.
Okay,
You,
I
you
finally
know,
find my train of thought. Go ahead, Vince.
it seems like today, maybe this is just from an outsider's point of view, but also going through this diligently, that today, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yes.
And because of not only the advancement in technology, like DNA testing or evidence collection, the ability through technology to communicate between agencies, but it also seems like the spirit of collaboration is even better today than maybe it had been in the past. Is that true? And can you talk about that a little bit?
That's absolutely accurate. We talk to everybody we can that has a knowledge or an expertise in a certain field. I've talked to people for the first time in this case, and they know way more about it than I do. So that's the people you want to tap into, and they not from my agency, from other agencies. And obviously, over time, between the state police, the Bristol Borough Police Department, our county detectives from old, they put a nice product together, and that's what we're building off of right now. They did a great job over the years, and we're building off of that. So I'm learning new stuff on this job every day.
Tim, I finally recall what I want to talk to you about because in talking and in reading a lot about this case, I remember one of the Bristol Borough police officers who were re-interviewed years later said that they thought they made a terrible mistake in wasting so much time investigating Paul Roach, who was the kid who had her name written down in a notebook and apparently was seen in Bristol near the post office or whatever. And the other thing it was told to me by Frank Parenteau, who in 1992 was the Bristol Borough Police Chief, was that they were certain that it was not the priest. And in fact, Alan Rubenstein told me that as well, because they had a dead alibi that he was somewhere else. Now, the stories say he was seen on Mill Street, but now there's this evidence that comes in that said you guys had evidence that he actually was in a lingerie shop because you had a time-stamped receipt. Is that fairly accurate? And do you believe the priest was ruled out because of that?
Listen, Mike, I haven't talked about this yet, but like as an active investigation right now, I'm kind of limited on certain things I can discuss right now because we want to keep the integrity of the investigation. And there could be future law enforcement techniques that we need to use where I don't really want to speak to that at this point, but obviously that stuff is written. Alibis are real things, and those investigators have written reports indicating facts like that. So we base that off of what people wrote back in the day. But for the integrity of the investigation, listen, our minds are still open.
It's a matter of not ruling out anybody at this point, including Zucchero, who one of your investigators told me you can't even rule him out because his story made sense, even though he was a kook.
Listen, you can't rule anybody out. That's why we're still, if we had somebody, we would have cleared this case already. We try to keep an open mind. And we learn, like I said, I learn new stuff on this case every day that I either talk with the district attorney or my counterparts with the state police. I'm learning new stuff every day, as are they. So yeah, you got to keep an open mind.
What do the pages say about the interrogation of both Sabatish and Schrader? What was their demeanor? What was written down about these guys in the report?
So, I'll focus more on Schrader, and perhaps that's a tell. I'll leave it at that. There were some very obvious nonverbal responses that intrigued us. I can't get into detail because even though we're talking in general terms about grand jury and I praise the work that was to be done, I can't at this point disclose the details, but I will say that, by all indications, there was a very good reason for their focus in the 90s, in the early 90s, to be on Schrader. Very, very good reason. And I'm further along than I was when we first spoke with my knowledge of the case. And I can assure you, the work that was done, and I just need to put, a pretty fine point on this. Tim and his colleagues, the troopers from the state police that are working in this case, have reviewed reports as old as 1946, to be exact, on one of the targets that they're focusing in on. To gather that kind of intelligence when this individual would have been a child is remarkable. And they're following up with interviews, actual live and in-person interviews, and not just in this area, to further that goal. And so, as much as in our cases, our unsolved homicides, which we've had tremendous success, we have a good recipe, a really good recipe to follow in these cases. More often than not, it's not a forensic break. It's this old school kind of get everyone together, review every piece of information. How many reports do you think? I know you said hundreds, but and as far as documents,
Mike said hundreds. It's thousands of
thousands.
reports.
In addition to the physical evidence, in addition to literally historical information, you provided us. We have a question for you, actually, that we don't let us forget. We have a question for you that you may help us, and it's very specific, and perhaps maybe will kind of be a tell for what we have in the future. But we're making tremendous headway, and I find that's more than half the battle.
Yeah. With the DNA, Mike, obviously that DNA on a case like this is the exception and not the rule. If we get a DNA hit, that would be great. We're not hanging our hat on it. We're trying to do old-fashioned police work, and we're trying to get through this and still build our case. Listen, there are still people alive that are involved with this case. We know firsthand.
Yeah, I mean, I just watched a documentary, the Jean Benet Ramsey documentary, where they had a suspect who knew things about the crime that no one else would have known, and the DNA matched. So I know this is and God, I hope it doesn't come to that where the DNA doesn't match, because we had one of the investigator, the DNA guy from who had helped solve the Chivarella case on, and he said that he thinks it's somebody completely different. But when you're talking about 1946 and accumulating this information on somebody's childhood, are we talking about Schrader? Or are we talking about the priest?
I think it's safe to say we're talking about Schrader. I'm prepared to say that.
So he actually was a Pennsylvania. He was born here. So this information you're talking about is Pennsylvania oriented.
Pennsylvania oriented, not necessarily Bucks, not excluding or not exclusive to Bucks County, but yes, Pennsylvania oriented.
So we're talking about a troubled child as well.
I think it's safe to say yes.
Okay. Vince?
Well, to piggyback on what Mike just alluded to with Eric Schubert and his work, his amazing work, right? Wonder Kid work helped to solve that case at the ripe old age of 18. When he spoke with us, it was stunning. I think that's probably the least of how we felt, was stunned when he told us he thought that we would ultimately a new suspect would arise that was responsible for this. And we poked and we prodded, and he said, based on his experience, he said at minimum, he goes, don't be surprised. And he placed his bet on that. How likely is something like that somebody that's brand new, not a suspect to date, is the perpetrator?
Vince, it's possible, probably not likely that we wouldn't have heard a name, or if the name is in a file, it just wasn't really, sensationalized that much in the reports. It's possible. I don't think that's the case. But again, like Mike just alluded to, our minds are open. We're taking calls on the case. I think this podcast has helped to make awareness, and I have to thank JD Mullane, who's done an unbelievable job over the years with the awareness of this case. And I watched his show with you, and his recollection of facts is impeccable. It was really impressive. And So, and I did see the clip on Eric Schubert. Jen and I are fortunate enough to be working a different case with some genetic genealogy, and we have kind of a general idea on how it works. And that's something obviously we're hopeful for, but not hanging our hats on it.
And I guess just to kind of piggyback on what Tim is saying, you know, Eric, obviously, like you said, you know, a phenom to have this success on the Chiavarella case at 18. But there's a key component that's missing here, and that is the lack of access to what the files say and what we know. And what we know a week ago is, you know, a lot more than what we know 3 months ago, but even what we know today as of a week ago, it's so he's doing it in this vacuum, opining that, well, because I suspect because of, you know, things that have been done throughout the years, and there is no successful DNA hit, it must be an unknown, because he's hopeful that there would have been some success. But I can tell you that what speaks volumes is the access to the information we have now and what has been developed by this present team, picking up the baton where others left off. So I really think, you know, I'm going to say a little more, I guess, with a little more confidence, that it is not at all likely. But, you know, but again, to Tim's point, that's why he's a great detective. You consider all possibilities. You don't rule them out until you know you have closed the case. So,
Tim, one of the questions that I get, because we have all these people who now want to be amateur sleuths,
yeah.
and they're saying, is it possible that that Trader was the guy, but it was in conjunction with someone else, or and I understand that the pastor and another priest or two other priests that were there were totally checked out, but still people think, could it have been one of the other priests and not this priest in conjunction with the Trader or by himself?
Yeah, I don't think it's at all a likely theory. Yeah, no, I don't. And you know, and it's tough. I think you and I talked about this, Mike. I know you know, you were raised Catholic. As was, if I could speak for you, Tim, and I still am, you know. Obviously, there were predator priests. We know about that, but that was not all of them. That's not the majority of them. That's sadly what we know about. You know, we hear about these horrible, horrible predators who violated our children throughout the years, but that's not the exception. So by virtue of just being a priest alone, I would say no, but also nothing in this very thorough investigation indicates that. The other point I just want to make too is, you know, I know you brought up, Micah, one of the individuals you interviewed from the past felt like time was wasted on a suspect. And that very well may be the case, but you have to do that. You have to fully vet everything, because even if you identify a firm suspect, if you don't waste that time, quote unquote, air quotes, on the waste, you know, you will not successfully prosecute the perpetrator.
Yeah, I think his point was that that too much time was spent on him when it could have been spent on other people, when it was you know, it was easily verifiable that he had a time-stamped
I see.
driver's test in Virginia.
I see.
But yeah, I mean, I hear you, and I understand, and I've been told by so many people, including the PA state police detectives, that you can't rule anybody out, because then you're kind of cutting your fingers off in the investigation. So I get that. Let me just, from a selfish point of view, and we're talking with Jen Schorn, the Bucks County DA, and Tim Perkins, the DA, office detective, who's done a great work on this case in conjunction with the Pennsylvania State Police. Uh, I was fortunate enough to have CBS national Saturday morning show pick up on this and bring even more light to the case, which I'm very fortunate, not for my own personal satisfaction, but because it being out there could bring other information in. Did that precipitate any other information that helped you guys?
Sure.
It's okay if you say no. It's fine.
Well, listen, Mike, the information's coming in from multiple sources. I don't know specifically from that specific incident, but we certainly have gotten calls and done our own homework, you know, going out to do obviously things that weren't done in the past.
And I can say, Mike, you know, credit to you, credit to the other news media outlets that have since followed, and to JD Moulin, as Tim spoke to. You know, the more interest there is in a case, sometimes that opens doors for us. Maybe not generates tips and leads, but for the necessary people that they need to interview. Sometimes that opens a door. I mean, sometimes it closes it too, but
Sure.
but it helps, to that pressure to know that other people are are fighting for justice in this case. And it's really cool to hear that people are rooting for us to do this for Carol Ann and her family. I mean, for her sister. So
Yes.
You,
Yeah,
Jen,
go ahead, Vince.
your job is so public facing, and it's an important part of the job of the DA. It's more than just the nuts and bolts of the work. And you're in an important area, important suburb of Philadelphia. And so and you were terrific, by the way, on the CBS show. It was really great to see that they included you. It was awesome. And I wonder two things. One, does it create any additional pressure that you may have had about this case? And then how do you deal with that? And then also with the trickiness of balancing all of that with your current caseloads?
yeah, no. And I'm going to also have Tim jump in on this. Personally, in this case, I don't feel it creates any additional pressure whatsoever. I have found, we have, and credit to my predecessor, Matt Weintraub, and, he has established such a great relationship with the media, and we have had tremendous success, generating tips and leads. And, sometimes there is some added pressure on cases, or sometimes you feel like the narrative may be different than what the case is really about, not pertaining to this case. But no, I don't personally. I don't know about you and your team.
I agree with Jen. I don't think there's any added pressure that we have right now from all the other pressures we have on this job. We're thankful to have Jen as our DA and giving us the opportunity to use some of these resources that she was able to get the office that they didn't have back in the day. But obviously, it would be nice to clear this case of this horrific crime for Carol Ann's family.
I've stayed in touch with the family, and I was able to arrange for them to go to the Sunday's Eagles game. So they really appreciate it. They're big Eagles fans up there in Berwick, PA. But I've gotten to know them really well, and they're really great people. And for them, I would really like to have this case solved. And it sounds to me, and I'm encouraged on this particular podcast, but it sounds to me you guys are really comfortable and enthusiastic about being able to solve this crime. That's the vibe I'm getting, that we're on a really good track to solve this. Is that accurate?
I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. And certainly as it relates to the family, the last thing I would want to do is re-traumatize them by making a promise that we're not prepared to meet. But I can tell you that, I'm impressed beyond words. I'm impressed beyond words with the progress that we're making, and hope that we continue on this path. And, I know we will report to you as soon as we are able, when we're satisfied that we have done everything that can be done. And if we have the answer for certain, but we have answers.
Sorry. So this is, Vince, if you have one more, I have one last question for them.
Sure.
But, go ahead.
Tim, and Jen, we talked about this last time in the Ben Salem case that you worked and ultimately solved. And we talked about the importance of a cold case and resolution for the community, for the families, and also for your own office to secure these things. And so, Tim, how do you balance a cold case like this, especially one that has now a lot of eyeballs on it, with a current workload? How do you manage that?
It's priorities. It's like Jen referred to before, that some cases there's a little more pressure on you if it's an active investigation or a murder that just happened on cold or on hot leads. So that it has to be a comfortable balance, and you take it as it comes. Thank God we have a great team, and with the troopers we can split up duties. So obviously everybody's not available every day, so you break down what needs to be done and you just get it done. Again, I don't feel time is on our side right now. You know what I mean? So you just have to balance it comfortably and just keep moving forward.
And I've
All right, you guys had, I'm sorry, Jen, go ahead. You want to add
No, my
something?
apologies, Mike. I'll be real brief to this. I've watched them do that. Like we have had unsolved cases in this office when then a current homicide happens and the leads are hot and you have to shift gears. But I can attest to the fact that personally to Tim and many of his colleagues, they regroup the second they can catch their breath on and get back to that cold case. And that's the rare talent that's needed in these. You cannot, put it on that back shelf and let it get colder. And it's a real special quality. And that's what the key is. That's the key to the recipe.
It is.
All right, you guys had a question for me.
Yeah.
I'm terrified here on what this could be, but
No.
So, Mike,
go right ahead.
you're a lifelong, well, you were a Bristol resident back in the day, right?
Yes.
So what is your recollection of the skating rinks back in the day in Bristol? Tell us what your knowledge is of your earliest thoughts as a child of the skating rinks in Bristol.
Ice
The
skate.
skating,
Mhm.
yeah, the
Right.
skating rinks were not there when I was a child. In fact, they weren't built. The one was built it was not enclosed. It was just a skating rink with a roof on it. And that was probably my high school years.
Okay.
And then what happened, they enclosed it, and then that particular one burned down, and they relocated another one. But we used to hang out. I mean, that was our hangout
Right.
at the time, but it wasn't there when I was a child. There was very few resources in Bristol Borough when I was a child, Tim.
Well,
And that,
from your recollection, like what year did that open structure was it there? Do you remember? I mean, obviously we'll be able to
it
find.
had to be somewhere in 1970 when they built that through a grant from the Grundy Foundation. But I remember people in Bristol saying nobody skates here. Like we had Silver Lake, which was when we waited for it to be frozen. Is there a reason why you asked that? Is this part of what could be?
Nope, no reason, Mike.
No, so it was just a curiosity question.
It's a curiosity. We heard about the lagoon. The lagoon had come up in the investigation with regards to there being a skating rink there. I think we're all pretty familiar with the Grundy rink now on Beaver Street. It's been there for many years, the main facility now. But I just want to ask you about your recollection being a kid growing up in the 60s
Yeah,
about,
it was a canal that
right?
kind of came through that area that we used to cross to get from one side to the other. So this somehow the canal itself before the skating rink, is this a factor in this crime?
No, sir, it doesn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
We just had some information of an interview that we did that was just talking about the rinks, and obviously we've been doing our homework and tapping into resources in Bristol at the Grundy Library and the Grundy Museum, and I just wanted to ask you about that personally. So nothing specifically at this point, no.
And everybody's
Okay.
recollection kind of varies a little bit, and I think it's a little bit older than some recall, and perhaps maybe that's you.
Yeah, I mean, I recall early in my high school years when they built that. So, all right, here's my last question. If there's no DNA match, which is a possibility, I've just learned through this John Benet Ramsey case, will you still be able to declare who this murderer was through your investigative work, which is what I'm hearing that DNA sometimes doesn't work out, so you have to just button it down with pure investigative work.
Again, I'm going to just say I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't want to promise something without a guarantee that we can deliver, but I can tell you that they have made tremendous headway. And again, I need to emphasize, it's a collaboration. It's the work that was done in the 60s, again, 70s, 80s, 90s, and present day. So I'm cautiously optimistic. Many of the questions have been answered. And again, we have the benefit of hindsight. Letting some of the other suspects, they were vetted and knowing that they were not in fact responsible. So, so I'm cautiously optimistic, I guess is the best way to say it. Did you want to add anything?
I did not.
He takes the fifth.
Guys, this has
I
been
want-
a real pleasure.
I have one last question.
Okay.
Jen, and Tim, do you have any engagement with the Doherty family?
I presently do not. I do not.
Okay.
No.
Nor have I, Vince.
Okay.
But
Okay.
that's
On
my
that note,
faith.
guys, it has been a real pleasure, and you've added so much to this. Jen, the second time you've been on. We really appreciate it. Tim, great to meet you and great to get information from somebody who's actively investigating the case. And, we're all on hold. You guys are still working it, and the public is on hold for this, especially people in Bristol have been following this podcast. And so this will be the second last podcast we do in this series, and we'll do one next week to wrap up the whole thing and go over all the details that we have put forth through this podcast. So you guys have been a really big help. I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much, Tim and Jen.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you,
Thank
Vince.
you, Vince. Take care,
All
guys.
right, that'll
Eternally
wrap it up
grateful.
for
Thank
episode
you.
13 of the Coldest Murder. We hope you enjoyed the commentary and the information presented. And we will see you next week with our grand finale on the Coldest Murder. Thanks, everybody, for listening and watching. Take care. Bye-bye.